the Northwing podcast. I'm Nick Stanig, digital lead here at the Northwing magazine. Today kickstarts our brand new series. It's a roundtable discussion. So one of the many discussions we have planned here at Northwing, and we're going to be exploring with people from across the medical industry, whether that be medical students, doctors, consultants. That's the idea with this discussion. We're trying to get a broader range of people and experiences and perspectives to really understand the topic at hand. Today's topic, this roundtable discussion, is all about applying to medical school. And so we have a couple different people here today. So we'll start with the first person on my screen. Daniel, do you want to give a little introduction to who you are, your background and all that?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Daniel. I am now almost a final year medical student at Sheffield Medical School on the graduate entry program. So did a degree beforehand in biomedical science at Sheffield University. My overall aspirations at the moment are to be a GP. Only until not too long ago, a couple months back, I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, but that very quickly changed after an excellent experience at placement in a rural GP setting. So things have changed a bit. But yes, thank you very much all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's all ours. Pleasure's all ours. The next person on my screen is Adrian. I'm going to give a little introduction to the...
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. Again, thank you very much for inviting myself and Daniel. As you can tell, we're twin brothers. We've been in it for the whole time, really. So everything we've decided on really has been the same for both of us. So we're both actually grad students, going to our 5th year of medical school or 4th year of graduate entry medicine at Sheffield University. We both we did a degree beforehand in biomedical science at Sheffield. So both Daniel and I, and then went on to Sheffield again to continue here because we really enjoyed being here, really. And then in terms of aspirations, also same thing, really. We both always considered plastic surgery for the longest time, but a few months ago we had a couple months in general practice in the Peak District, which is this big national park next to Sheffield, and it was in a really rural place, and we had a very good time, some great patients, and now we've really started to go towards that direction as well. So medicine can be really unpredictable, as a lot of people can sympathize with.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. And Drew, is that how I pronounce it? I'm going to give a little introduction.
Yeah, well done. Not many people get it right on the first time. Hi, everyone. So I'm Drew. I also study at University of Sheffield. I'm pretty sure I met Daniel and Adrian at one of the clinical skills teaching at one point. I remember, I think it was the surgical skills by BAS or something. So I feel like I met you guys before. It's a cool story to have twins doing the same degree and path. I just graduated from University of Sheffield. So now I'm doctor working on the academic foundation program at London Northwest. So my first year is at Norfolk Park, which is a DGH. And then my second year is at Chelsea and Westminster, doing more acute stuff. So far, I think my aspirations have stayed the same as they were in med school, and I'm thinking of doing something in the acute care setting, that'd be interventional cardiology or stroke medicine or something like that.
Oh, fantastic. I know right at the start of this discussion, I said we'll have guests far and wide across medicine. Somehow all the people we've had from the University of Sheffield, but we won't talk about that. But they all are the medical students who have gone through the grueling process of applying to medical school and had very, very different kind of experiences. So I want to start off with the question is, how did you all get into medicine? Was there a moment in your lives where it just popped into your head as, I want to be a doctor because of XYZ? So anybody want to go into how they all got into medicine?
Yeah, I'm happy to start since I was first last time. So I think it really was a bit of a light bulb moment. It wasn't until a module during my first degree in biomedical science where we had human anatomy as one of the modules. And it was when, during my very first dissection, I realized that there was something about seeing and understanding human pathology and trying to work around to heal a person. As I was dissecting and seeing how the body altered with disease, I think that was the light bulb moment, thinking, how can I really think about applying this in my day-to-day working life. Before that, it really was never medicine at all. It was really more into the sciences and into research. So that was more my interest at the time. Ever since that module, I decided that maybe something more practical might be a better option.
Yeah, and likewise for myself, obviously very similar experiences, but also I couldn't really see myself working just in a lab. I really wanted that human connection and making a proper impact that I could see rather than doing research and maybe something happening down the line, which research, of course, is supremely important and is important in medicine as well. Lots of medical practitioners obviously are very interested in research as well. But I wanted really more of that day-to-day involvement with patients, and that I quickly found out in my first degree as well. And what else? Yeah, actually, for Daniel and I, it always used to be dentistry. Actually, when we were very young, because our dad's a dentist, we grew up around that environment. But obviously, always seeing about dentistry when you're young, you don't find it so romantic anymore, and so you sort of want to strive away from that. That's what happened to us. It never really was about medicine when we were younger, so it kind of was a light bulb moment. It just sort of pieced together for both of us, and we sort of decided to go down that route. But yeah, it was a combination of both chance and also having some different experiences in our first degree, which led us to this path.
Yeah, and I think for me it was kind of the other way. So I knew I loved science, and I thought let's experience careers in that. So at school they had taster weeks, and I started with dentistry, funnily enough. And I think very quickly I understood that actually it was too monotonous for me, and I needed something that would allow me to sort of do something different every day. And I thought, okay, well, I've heard of medicine. Let's give this a go. And it's quite cliched that on the first day, and I could see the breadth of different things you have to do for each patient and the different diseases, especially for general medicine. And that kind of, since then, I had kind of one goal and one path that I needed to follow. Unfortunately, I didn't get the grades at A levels to kind of have a strong application for medicine. And my school actually said, you're welcome to apply, but you probably won't get it. So it kind of deterred me from applying, which is why I did biomedical science at Sheffield. And I chose Sheffield again for biomedical science because you get to do dissection in your second year, and I think that was really important for medicine later on because I found that really useful. And then on to medicine and never looked back since.
What was the hardest part of applying to medical school, do you think? How did you cope with that nervousness and stress? Because Drew, you just said that you didn't have the grades, the correct best possible grades at the time. So how did you learn to overcome your initial you didn't get the grades? How did you overcome that? And what was the hardest part of applying to medical school?
So for me, I think the hardest part. So I was applying, I believe in 2013 and then again in 2017. So 2 applications. The hardest part back then was just no information regarding the different medical schools and the different programs that are within that. So you not only have your bog standard undergraduate role, but then you have the graduate entry, but then you have widening access entries as well, which allow for different criteria. And I think the hard part is now, less so now, but back then at least, was trying to find all that information in one place. But now you have quite a few different websites, which I can't remember on the top of my head, that give you these kind of things. So I think the hard part of applying is, one, the entrance exams, which I always think are harder than med school itself. And then 2 is knowing what strengths you bring, where your grades are, and then kind of statistically finding the med schools that give you the best chance of actually getting into. So I would say those are the 2 hardest things of getting into med school.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what you just said. The exams to get into medical school are quite daunting and they really are quite intense. That's definitely one of the big challenges, but I might be speaking a bit philosophically here, but I think my biggest challenge was sort of adjusting to the mindset of a really studied, focused degree, one which you had to keep at it for a very long time and adjust to that sort of studying style. And just trying to get over that barrier that you might think that you're not good enough for the sort of field. It can be quite intimidating getting into it. You think that you're the odd one out, and just trying to find that balance, really trying to know that you're in it. Once you get in, they have decided that you're probably good enough and you can go on with that. I think that was probably the biggest adjustment I had to make, is just finding that right mindset.
Yeah, and just to give a bit of background, Daniel and I, we've been at it in education for the whole time. We haven't had any gap years or anything. So straight from sixth form, we got into our 3-year degree biomedical science, and immediately we got into medicine. both of us at Sheffield. And really for us, one of the big things that stopped us doing dentistry initially was I didn't feel mature enough. So I've always considered, even now, I still believe that, getting into medical school or dental school, whatever, so a proper, serious degree like that, where you get into a job straight after. I've always found that at 18 years old you're very young to make an important decision for the rest of your life. So, and that's how I feel. I think that's really one of the biggest challenges that I had when I was that young. It's that one. And also in our situation, I really couldn't imagine one of us failing and the other one carrying on. So one of my biggest fears was not getting in and then the other one getting in and the one progressing, the one not. So we have this weird situation, but luckily a matter of luck and effort, obviously, we both got in. So it was really a mix of immaturity that I was scared of and also a fear of one of us moving on.
I was gonna say I couldn't agree more with that sense because I think all three of us are graduates going into medicine, and I've frequently told my friends that came in through sixth form. I mean, credit to them, but I genuinely don't think I would have done as well in med school as I did if I'd come in straight from sixth form. I don't think I had maturity, but also just the mental capacity to take in all that information, not only in first year, but it just keeps getting more and more, which is not a scary thing, but having done a degree previously, you know how uni works, and that made life a lot easier for me, and it seems to be echoed for most graduates actually. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
100% yes.
Is there a
Absolutely.
slight sense of kind of imposter syndrome and like how am I in this position and why should I be expected to absorb all this kind of information, completely new system, completely new dynamics onto completely new course coming straight from school, very structured, kind of regimented kind of institution to going to uni where freedom is either liberating or very self-destructive.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, medical school does sort of try to hold your hand a little bit in the beginning. Oh, you started with preclinical stuff and you're in classes and so on. You don't need to get thrown to the hospitals immediately, really. I mean, you do get a bit of clinical experience, but not really in first years of medical school. But yeah, it's a lot to take in, really. I mean, for us, thankfully, we were together through COVID as well. So during our first couple of years of medical school was really tough because we also had COVID and everything going on. So even imagining that would have been a first year in medical school, all that going on as well would have been overwhelming. And if I didn't have Daniel with me, I don't know if I would have managed to be completely frank. So it's difficult. It's really difficult.
You guys mentioned that you found your placement, your work experience. Was that an easy experience to try and find and kind of work through that? Was that did you have a lot of information about where should you go, where in the community should I go to find this work experience, or how did the finding a work experience work?
I think quite it's
Yeah,
quite difficult. It's quite difficult with work experience in the UK. I feel like there's a bit of gatekeeping there. If you have family that are doctors, you'll be in hospital very quickly and you'll get that experience and you know what to do. On my side, I was the only, first person to go to med school from my side of the family. And the only connections I had were in Kenya, and I used those to then go into hospital and experience medicine that way. But actually, if I was to do it just in the UK, I would have had no experience. And I actually didn't have any hospital experience in the UK. Having said that, you still need experience, not just in medicine or in, shadowing a doctor, but you need experience in healthcare. So what I did was, I was a HCA for a while. So that gave me medical experience. And I could use that not only for my interview, but also to understand how the NHS works and if it actually works for me. Because the NHS, as you know, is a huge system and there's a lot of problems within it. So work experience is hard to get, but there are a lot of ways around it, from taster days, which are becoming more and more accessible now. And then there's other, you can do allied health professional roles from the age of 18 and get yourself in and then build your contacts yourself if you have none. And obviously, if you have contacts, then life is a little bit easier. But there are definitely ways to get into medicine.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely
it's
spot
quite
on.
amazing how we have very similar experiences, really. Because Adrian and I we were the first doctors in the family as well, to be doctors, not quite finished yet, but the first medics in the family. We have the closest connections we had was actually our cousin's husband, and he is a urologist. And so, for work experience wise, it was from that contact that we were able to get a week in a urology placement, which is incredibly useful in the UK. So that was Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, without him, I don't know how we would have done it otherwise. And again, very similar experience. We were both HCAs, healthcare assistants during our first degree. We worked for 2 years just on the sideline in an agency. And that was incredibly helpful to get both a taste of what one side of the healthcare field feels like, if that's really for us. Also to build our confidence speaking to patients or residents in care homes. So that's something I would personally recommend to anyone considering applying to medical school.
Yeah, you've got to have those stories to tell in your interviews. So having experience in a job like this, as working to give an idea of what a healthcare system does. In our case, we worked at care homes, so it was homes for the elderly, really, and you just did a whole bunch of jobs. You moving them about, talking to them, looking after them, cleaning them, feeding them, so on. And you get all these by just being around patients. Really, you get exposure and experience, and you can talk about these stories, and you sound as if well, you've obviously been helping in the healthcare field in the UK already, so it's almost like you're already in it. So one of the biggest pieces of advice Daniel and I can really give is that you've got to do some level of work. Now it's easier said than done because as a graduate student, obviously we're already over 18. We can do this more easily when you're in school. I'm not sure how easy it is. Maybe you can get some little part-time jobs or whatever, but yeah, not quite as easy, I think. But yeah, you've got to do something like that. Obviously, work experience is also very useful, and obviously, you're working on doctors more than sort of care home staff. So, and we can talk more about experience as well later if you like.
But I think just to add to that, it's really important to have experience, not just for the interview stage, but in my first year, there was 45 people that dropped out in the first year because then they experienced what med school is. I wouldn't say in medicine as a whole, because we don't get as much clinical time. In some unis, you barely get any. But medicine itself and just the science and stuff behind it, I think with work experience, you can kind of already screen if you're built for that kind of life and not having to then, pay tuition fees, go through the whole uni application process, which is tough. I won't say traumatic, but tough. And you can kind of allow you to kind of make that decision earlier rather than later. So for that aspect as well, I think it's important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's sorry, I think it's a difficult again balance to have because on the one hand, the more experience you have, the better because the real world situation practicing medicine is entirely different from that you see in media or from a lot of the pre-established expectations you might have before you get into medicine. So it really is important that all applicants really strongly consider, is it the sort of lifestyle that they want? Can they see themselves working as doctors for the rest of their lives? So really, yes, getting as much experience as possible, probably more experience than we got. We only had a week. I would say more than a week is what you really need. Because once again, you really have to make the decision, somehow make it as informed decision as you can. So I 100% agree. It's really important for all applicants to have that behind them, not only again as a talking point in interview, but really for themselves to make that informed decision, as it's a lifelong career.
Yeah, so and really just talking to doctors, the thing you'll find out very quickly as well if you talk to doctors about medicine is that everyone has a completely different answer. So some might say, "Oh, go for it, it's an honorable career, and I recommend I've had a great experience." Other people, like our cousin's husband, he was saying, "Guys, don't do it. It's a lifestyle that you won't be expecting. The work hours are brutal." He was pushing us away from it really. He was saying dentistry actually is better work-life balance, and he was really, yeah, he was pushing it onto us. So I think it's really valuable to get a more holistic idea of what it really is like work. It's very sensationalized in media, working as a doctor. Obviously in series, everyone talks about Grey's Anatomy and so on, and it's not like there's no romances in hospital settings. I'll tell you that much that I've seen. So it's yeah, you've got to get as realistic of an experience or of an idea as possible before you get into medical school, which is obviously easier said than done for a young person who's impressionable, like we were. So
So we've
yeah,
we've talked. You guys have talked about work experience and approaching medicine from a holistic kind of standpoint, understanding all the different layers and experiences that come with being in the medical industry. And we've talked about kind of the negatives or the challenges that you have to undergo when applying and when you're in medical school. Well, I wanted to find out what was the most exciting part of applying to medical school and then being in that situation of you're on the way to becoming a doctor.
Getting in. I think getting in is the
Yeah.
most exciting bit, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
yeah, just think about it more. One most exciting bit. I don't know. It's just really just imagining, the whole process of getting in and so on. For Daniel and I, we applied to obviously 4 different universities, and I guess it was exciting trying to figure out. We visited different universities in Glasgow, so we applied to Sheffield, Glasgow, and Cambridge. And just going to each university and experiencing life there for a little bit and getting an idea, imagining the future. Yeah, that was just, it was really, it wasn't that, it was really exciting, the idea of the prospect, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I would agree. I think the most exciting part is actually knowing that you're in, because the process to applying and all the hoops that you have to jump over for you to, finally get that letter or that phone call. In our case, it's actually a phone call, and it was one of the most. It's probably the best day of my life getting that phone call, because what had happened was I had gotten a phone call while I was in Greece, where we are originally from. So I had the phone call, and they told me that I had a place, and I asked them, my brother, he's in my twin, he also applied for the course, and do you have a place for him as well? And they said, well, I'm very happy to let you know that we have a place for him as well. And so I had to run down and tell Aiden the news. And so that was the most sort of electrifying moment in the application process, actually, getting that letter. But, all that work that comes before that is just, you can't really underestimate it. It really is an entire year or even more of preparation to get that letter. So it's quite grueling.
Yeah, for sure. I echo exactly what these guys said. In getting that confirmation letter is the best feeling. During med school, I'd say the most exciting moment that I had is, I think a lot of people have this moment where you finally start realizing that actually you're about to become a doctor. You start feeling like a doctor, and that moment that when it comes, and everyone has at different stages. Some people are third year, fourth year, fifth year. I think I had it at one point in fourth year where I was part of a crash course, and I actually felt like I was doing something like a doctor, because imposter syndrome is a huge thing in med school and throughout med school. So that moment felt really good, and I'd say that was the most exciting part. Once you start as an F1, you realize actually you're probably very far off a doctor, and then you have to build that confidence back up. But yeah, I'd say that specific moment was a pretty good moment.
Yeah. On top of that, I think for me, I've had times where there's been that light bulb moment, that, oh, I really do know more than I thought I did. But at the same time, there's a lot of that creeping, sort of in the background, that you develop this knowledge throughout medical school, and you slowly gain these facts, and you build these facts in this knowledge base. And before you really know it, you have a lot more of an understanding than you realize, just by observing throughout years and years and reading every single day or as often as you can. And so before you really know it, you do get quite a good understanding. But as Drew said, once you graduate, I'm not at that stage yet, but everyone that I know has said the same thing to me, is that you realize that there is a lot more to know. And once you have those responsibilities, once you're no longer the student but the doctor who has to answer that call and has to see that patient in need, that is when you realize, oh, there's a whole world to this. There's a whole other side to this whole story that I haven't been introduced to yet. So
Yeah,
it's quite
just
fascinating in that way.
yeah, just a funny story as well. All the F1s just started recently a few weeks ago for the first shifts, and we met all of the F1s sort of like in this big doctor's room, and they all looked so scared. Bless them. We were saying, "Oh, I feel worried for you guys. How are you feeling?" They're like, "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not prepared for this. It feels unreal. Am I ready for this?" So it's like obviously you never really are ready for that responsibility. Once you finally you have the DR in front of your name, it's all everything's changed. All the dynamics have changed. You're now the doctor, you're responsible for the patient rather than being sort of the student learning, and you're there to just get some experience. It's a completely different thing. You're responsible, so you can never
Yeah.
really be prepared for that, which is what a lot of people get into medicine don't. And you always think like, oh, once I get into medical school, I've pretty much made it. Not quite. You're always learning. It's a lifelong vocation, it's a lifelong path. So yeah, it's a lot to it, really.
Yes,
I
and adding
think
to that, sorry, and just quickly adding to that, And now, a few weeks into the training, a lot of the doctors are already feeling so much more comfortable, So
Yeah.
initially they would have this shock that, oh, it's a massive step taken. But now a lot of them feel that, very quickly you do find your steps. I think Drew can probably attest to that feeling as
Yeah.
well.
No, for sure. I think an important point that's come out of this discussion was trust the process, and that goes from the application. Trust that the hard work that you put in, because the application, as Daniel said, takes a while, a lot of grit, and it's almost extracurricular because no one's going to do that for you, and you have to do a lot of research. So trust that process. Trust the process of med school, because med school is designed to teach you how to become a doctor. And then when you get into F1, I know you won't trust the process, but I think after a month of being a doctor, you start actually saying, okay, med school did teach me something, and I do kind of know what I'm doing. And the same thing will happen when you're an F2 and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
You guys have talked about that journey of, oh, you had that realization for a moment. It's like, oh, wow, I know a lot more. I could be I'm a doctor right now. Then it gets brought down. But what in your minds and your experiences so far, what makes a good doctor, and what responsibilities do doctors and medical professionals in general have to their community? What responsibilities do they have to their community?
I think that's a very, very good question. I think really there's two main attributes to being a good doctor. One is, of course, having that knowledge and being that person that can consistently, try to improve themselves, trying to learn a little bit more, when they have made a mistake or when they have lacked a little bit of knowledge, they can go read up on it or learn from that experience. That's the first point. It's the obvious point. But the second point, which is probably even more important, is just being a good, kind person, really trying to be there to help. It sounds quite cliche, but I think it really does make all the difference. When I find that patients often appreciate more than you really being the expert. It's for you to be a person, to be a human being. And that's when you really can connect to them. That's when they're more likely to open up to you, to reveal more information that is probably very important that they probably wouldn't have revealed to you in the first place. So being human and being the expert really is the combination of what a doctor really entails. That's the whole story behind everything, really.
And also, if I could add maybe a third little attribute or a little bit of something that a doctor should bring as well, is that they need to be resilient. Medical school is a long process, of course, is very long. And then, of course, the whole life, working life is you're working for 30 years, 35 years, however long you really wish to. And if you don't have the resilience to keep going, I mean, if you see the doctors working in hospitals and so on, I mean, they're always at it. From the second they walk into the hospital to the second they can manage to get out, they're always at it. And if you can't tolerate all this information, all this energy, if you can't tolerate that, it's been very difficult for you to work as a doctor. You've got to sort of know when to be on as well, and you also have to know when to switch off. So you've got to be flexible in that mindset. You can't let medicine dictate your life always, as even though it does feel that way most of the time. So yeah, you have to know when to be on and to be off. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think they've covered most of the points. The only thing I guess I've learned over the last month of being a doctor is a nervous doctor, or a doctor that has, is a bit more cautious, is a safer and a better doctor than someone that is overconfident. Especially as, med students, as F1s, as really junior people. I think a key attribute is to not be sort of egotistical and think that you know everything, even though you may feel it. Especially as fifth year med students, you're technically the senior med student. Being overconfident in those situations can be dangerous. Can also curb your learning and your potential to be even better than you are. So, yeah, just to add to those things. But I think these guys covered the main points.
I think the last, I mean, we're coming to the end of this discussion. I would say I have two final questions. You all mentioned at one point that the NHS currently is struggling and has loads and loads of issues. So my question would be, where do you see the NHS in 20 years, and how, the medical industry as a whole in the UK, where do you see that in 20 years?
Yeah, that's the golden question, isn't it? Really, where are we going? I think the more experience that I get into really what the NHS entails and what the NHS offers at the moment, almost the more grim the outlook appears, to be honest with you. Working in the GP setting where Adrian and I were both in this very small practice in a rural setting. And so we were both had our own clinics. We're seeing all these patients every single day. And after working in that environment, you get to see what we can offer and what we can't offer, and also how long people have to wait before things we offer, can actually take place. And it does feel a little bit hopeless sometimes, seeing that, okay, this person has potential ADHD, but the referral will take place, but they will probably only be seen a few years from now because of the waiting lists. So I think it's difficult in terms of that regard, but also, of course, of all the paid problems and the problems that doctors and all the healthcare staff have had with their working life. The whole system is struggling, that much is certain. But I think, again, the NHS really depends on the goodwill of staff. And I don't know how it's going to continue, but there is going to be a way that NHS will carry on, I feel. I don't think it's going to implode. I think it's going to carry on. I'm going to let you guys also offer something to that conversation.
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, the NHS has had problems for a long time. Not to excuse any shortcomings or so on, but it's been issues like this since the 80s, 90s. Really, people have been saying, "Oh, when will the NHS implode? When will it all just self-destruct?" And it hasn't. It's continued for decades and decades. Obviously, since the 40s, and obviously, there's a reason why. It's a national religion, really. Everyone wants to support the NHS. Everyone really believes in the NHS, and hopefully that can continue. We hope it does. We don't want the NHS also to become privatized and so on. We want it to be free, for everybody at the point of entry, really. But I guess time will tell. It's very difficult. It depends obviously on the politics and all of it as well, and the economy and Brexit and all of it. It's a very difficult conversation to have. I wonder what, as a doctor, drove you have to add to this. Really, it's difficult.
I'll probably answer this question, a different version of this question. I think where the NHS is going to be in 20 years' time, I think that is now becoming more of a political question than a medical question. And for prospective medical students and junior doctors like ourselves, yes, it is a political question that we should be engaging in, but at the same time, enjoy the process. There is a lot to learn from the NHS. There is a lot to gain from the NHS. And if you go in with a positive mindset from a day-to-day, not looking at bigger picture, but I'm looking at more day-to-day, you will get a lot out of it. And I've loved every moment of the job so far. There have been really hard days, but actually when you step back and sit down, you actually feel quite privileged to be working in it. So I think the takeaway from that is if you're in the system for 20 years, yes, you will face hardship, but I think you will face more good than bad. And I think that's what makes the job worth it. So I'll probably leave it at that. Sorry if I didn't answer your question.
No, I think that's the perfect kind of way to end this roundtable discussion on that positive note, saying that there is hope. There are great people, and like you guys are going to be working and being the future of the NHS. So I want to thank you guys for participating in this roundtable discussion. I think we all learned a lot. I mean, I certainly did, and I realized that all the stress and anxiety and pain and being that resilient, working in the NHS, working in medicine is all for the betterment of our society. So thank you very much, guys, for participating today. I appreciate it.